You're listening to Trek.fm.
Hello and welcome to From There to Here, Trek FM's 50th anniversary rewatch of all 729 Star Trek adventures from Broken Bow, Oklahoma, all the way to Yorktown Base and Star Trek Beyond. I'm one of your hosts for today's episodes, Lee Hutchison, and I'm joined by Davis.
Hello, sir. How are you tonight?
Oh, I'm excited. We've got some interesting episodes in this bundle of episodes to go through. So yeah, I'm kind of quite curious to see what your reaction is to some of them. I think some of these episodes are classed as some people's favourites. Some of them are, have been called some of the worst episodes of Star Trek. So I think we're going to have some interesting discussions over the next few days.
Indeed, we are. I'm looking forward to it. What's the first one we want to go over?
Yeah, we're going to be doing Demon. Voyager is low on fuel and finds a planet that has a mysterious source of energy that might be able to keep them going. So, what did you think of Demon?
Well, it was an interesting episode, don't get me wrong. And one of the cool highlights of it, it's directed by Potsy, Anson Williams from Happy Days fame. One of the cool things I did like about it is Harry is actually taking charge of himself. He's building up more confidence. So, and it actually built up a little continuity. He talked about what has happened over the course of a few years, and he's really wanting to prove himself. But, overall, it's okay. It's not a great episode, but it's okay.
Yeah, I think that you make a really good point there. I mean, surely a promotion is just around the corner now for Harry Kim. So, yeah, this episode frustrates me a bit. I think the Harry Kim part is really good and probably the highlight of the episode, to see him actually going, yeah, I've got all this experience, that I've done all these things, that I should be able to influence meetings more, and we all get to that kind of probably stage in our career. So I think that's to be applauded. That I think any kind of character development with Harry Kim is definitely warranted. But for me, outside of the Grey Alert, I think this is actually one of the worst episodes of Star Trek Voyager. Great way to start the week, people hearing this kind of being a negative Nancy. But yeah, it's one of the worst episodes. I think, there are some interesting aspects. The Harry Kim element, I think the idea of Voyager really running low on power is what I would have liked to have seen throughout the series. Them really struggling with energy, power reserves, having to kind of scrap and find all these resources. But I just think the episode, from my point of view, it's just a total mess. That what's actually interesting about this episode is reduced to 30 seconds at the end. That we've got this kind of mystery with Kim and Paris, which, it's okay. But this idea at the end that they're going to make clone versions of all the crew without kind of blinking or it really being a big decision, and then they leave behind a planet of Voyager crew, that is a really interesting idea that's been reduced to a 30-second decision, a shot, and then off they go into space. I find that absolutely baffling how they came to that conclusion to go down that road.
Yeah, absolutely, because, you think in your mind, all right, you see Voyager land. That's one of the cool things about the episode. But, it was just so blasé. They just say, hey, we're going to let you clone some people. And, well, not really clone people, but mimic, or however the process was. And we're out of here. So see y'all later.
Yeah, one of the worst episodes of Star Trek, period, is for Up the Long Ladder, where they clone all these, Irish people, or they start inbreeding or relationships, all that sort of stuff. And it's a terrible episode, but at least they kind of go down the road of having a debate, having a discussion. It's kind of poorly executed, but that kind of episode hinges on that kind of aspect. On this, what is one of the most interesting parts is just totally forgotten, and I just don't get it. I don't understand why they've made that decision.
And did you also notice there was one time where Harry and Tom were like, I think we need to take down the Vulcan, or he said Tuvok at one point, but I was like, when was this animosity built up right there? I don't know. It was just kind of like a bitterness toward him, and I just didn't remember all that in there, but who knows?
Yeah. And even Janeway, for example, I think that's really out of character. That the Janeway, as you say, is so blasé about giving off all these kind of cloning and giving away kind of the essence of the crew. that's not Janeway whatsoever. Like, you know, that goes against probably a lot of the Prime Directive, a lot of moral issues. I'm sure Metatrex could probably do an amazing episode discussing this kind of moral choice. It seems so, yeah, it's not Janeway. I don't think it fits in with the continuity of the series in terms of decisions they make. They wouldn't give someone a replicator. Why would they give the kind of the DNA coding and the essence of the crew away kind of so easily? Security risks aside, it's very bizarre.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting episode for sure.
Yeah, not one of the best, I would say, from this, but obviously, you know, Course Oblivion will come next season, so that kind of redeems it in a slight way, but as a one-off episode, it's definitely not one of any kind of note for myself.
All right, so should we move on to Valiant?
Yeah, fleeing a Jem'Hadar attack aboard a runabout, Jake and Nog are rescued by a Defiant-class ship crewed by overeager Red Squad cadets who are biting off more than they can chew when they go hunting down one of the biggest Jem'Hadar ships in the quadrant. So what did you think of Valiant?
It was a decent episode. I mean, it's just so weird just to start off how Jake and Nog are actually heading to Ferenginar to open up an agreement with, you know, the Grand Nagus to help with the fight with the Dominion. I mean, and then all of a sudden they encounter Red Squad, who has been missing. So you have to wonder. It kind of reminds me of it was an old historical story of the Shenandoah from the Civil War, where they had lost contact and they were still fighting, and the war was already over for so long. And I think they actually ended up in 6 months or 7 months later, they ended up in England, and that's where they surrendered right there. So it was kind of like a play on that, I thought. Some of the choices that was made, you have to wonder, you know, if this was the best and brightest, if Red Squad is supposed to be this way. I mean, they were kind of not the best. Of course, they were thrown into situations that, you know, they probably more people could not have survived, but it was interesting to say the least. I mean, I think the downfall was when they all of a sudden they hit the battleship, and all of a sudden they realized, oh, this isn't going to destroy it. What do you think?
Yeah, like that moment was always quite exciting in the show. I remembered watching it for the first time in the 90s, and like when the ship explodes, you're like, oh man, that's such a cool explosion. And then when it isn't destroyed, you're like, oh no. It's an episode, I think, that's not the greatest, but there's certainly elements that I really like, and I'm a huge fan of Nog. I think he's one of the best and shining examples of character development in Star Trek, and I think the idea that he can admit at the end of the episode that he was wrong, the episode is all about that kind of bravado of not admitting you're wrong, thinking you've got all the best solutions, that I'm sure if it was released today it would be classed as a biting critique of the millennial culture. I think it's really interesting to see these young kids behind the lines, and that they do kind of fall into these kind of rank and file, that they're making these decisions that they believe is for the best. And, you know, I haven't worked in the military myself. I know my brother has. And, you know, I wouldn't be surprised about a lot of these kind of young kids that are kind of being shipped out to war, you know, all around the world, kind of throughout history, that I'm sure they always think that they're the ones that have got the best solutions, the best causes, that the adults are of a generation gone, their tactics aren't the best. But sometimes it shows that kind of cooler heads are required, that experience is needed with the blend of youthfulness, and I think that would really benefit them in the long run.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the other cool things about it, I think, was what Nog said at the very end to Dorian, because she's like, I still believe he's a good man. You know, if he failed, that means we failed. And Nog just simply said to her, he was a good man, but he was a bad captain.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a very powerful beat.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that that's something that we don't see a lot of in Star Trek, that they sometimes try to have their cake and eat it, I think, where you can have these characters that are kind of super flawed, but they still manage to somehow save the day. But like this, at the end of the day, that they do throw him almost under the bus, that, yeah, he might have been a good guy, but his ineptitude, his poor decision-making cost lives, that they didn't need to make that decision that cost so much of that young crew their lives, that a loss of life is always tragic, but when it's youthful kids, it always hurts a bit more, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it was also kind of an interesting point that, we've been kind of in this war arc for kind of a good year now, and it's good to sometimes see just that extra point of view that I think Deep Space Nine at its best during the war can do, that kind of day in the life, that what's it like to be kind of O'Brien dealing with this war, being a family man? What's it like to be the Klingons dealing with, their issues during the war? And I think this is an interesting idea of just taking it out of the station and showing what it's like to be kind of an academy member during the war, which is kind of a rare thing in itself in the series, and kind of an interesting angle, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole point of Red Squad I thought was really interesting because it just seemed like it was an elite group, and it was like the top of the top. And I think, doesn't this also harken back to Next Generation with Wesley?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
First Duty?
Ah, yes. So, and that was with Tom Paris's twin. What's his name?
Nick Locarno.
Yes, Locarno.
I always think of Tom Paris will always be Nick Locarno to me, but without the having to pay another writer for every time his name's mentioned.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you could make an interesting point that, like, with Valiant and then how kind of teenagers were shown in that episode, Wesley Crusher, Charlie X, that the writers in Star Trek tend to think, like, young men, young women are cocky individuals who are just totally inept and usually result in getting people killed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, before we wrap this one up, we always have to talk about every team needs a montage, and this one had a montage.
And even Rocky had a montage, and it's always good when you get one in Star Trek. They're ever so rare, so when they come up, they're like, yes, here we go, Star Trek has got a montage. All that's missing is some like rock and roll music from Dennis McCarthy.
That would be pretty epic.
So is there anything else you'd like to say about Valiant before we sign off for the day?
No, I think we pretty much covered it.
Yeah, so if people want to get in contact with you, where could people find you on the internet?
You could find me at Davis Grayson on Twitter. And you could also find me on Facebook, popping up from time to time in the Babel Conference. And you could also find me on the Phantom Podcast Network, where we talk about many things geek culture clash, Blood of Kings, the Highlander podcast, and we also have Couch Potato Theater. So check us out.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that podcast myself. I've heard nothing but good things, so I'm really going to have to dive into that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo, at Star Trek VHS. You can find me on my own podcast, also discussing geek culture. And as a Scottish person, there truly can only be one, so I will be taking that mantra. You can find me on my own podcast on the Nerd Party, the Senate Floor. And yeah, we'll be back again tomorrow to discuss One and Profit and Lace. So hopefully you can join us tomorrow. So live long and prosper, everyone.